Welcome to the October. Sorry. Welcome to the October installment of the Forge Modeling and Simulation Community Update. So a few things I want to talk about today. Welcome aboard. I'm going to share my screen to go over a few things here. And then we'll be able to get moving with our presentation. So just a way for an agenda items. I just want to mention a few things. I want to give us a short update or a quick update on the field schedule. I know there's been lots of talk and lots of discussion if you're coming in other Forge full team meetings or other discussions. I know we have quite a few of these now for different topical areas. So last I heard it, and it should be pretty accurate, is the biggest field thing we need to talk about updating is, of course, the drilling of well 16B. The planning is underway. John McClellan, he has most of the well plans completed. Most of the wellhead is designed. They are working on contracting and other things now. It's looking like that rig should be on site and drilling. I believe it is, targeted right now to be the March-April timeframe of next year, and planning for approximately 90 days of rig on site time, probably less than that. But just so you are wondering that, so the next new data we'll likely get for the reservoir will start coming in after that drilling and during that drilling campaign next April. But okay, so moving on. So for today's presentation, we're going to invite Alita Finella from Golder. She's going to talk about fitting fracture planes through the MEQ data from our most recent stimulation. Important part of this is I think she's going to work through the thought process behind it, knowing that it is a non-unique interpretation. So what our plan was is we're going to go through how we did it, and then we're going to actually open it up to the community to make the same data set available as we processed it. And if others would like to go through and do their own interpretation, perhaps in a few months or maybe 6 months, we can come back together and kind of compare them all together and see what we come up with and see how things are either consistent or inconsistent, and we can work from there. And last, we're talking right now, it's not a done deal yet, but I think it's going to end up happening, is there's working on an SPE datathon with the Geothermal Technologies Office in Forge, and we believe this data set may be part of that datathon. It's not a final decision yet, but it likely will happen. A couple of things I want to mention before we get into the technical talk is Forge modeling and simulation presentations. So our team, actually, I'll be giving a presentation at AGU in Chicago in December. I won't talk too much about it other than we will be doing that. I believe we have 5 or 6 papers or abstracts submitted to the Stanford Geothermal Workshop for, I believe it's next February, from the Forge team itself. And I want to note that the ARMA did actually put a call out for papers for their 23 meeting, and I think that I'm not sure the deadline, but it's coming up. The reason I mention all these is I want just in general for the community. If you are going to be giving a presentation and you're doing modeling on Forge, please send me, the conference name and your title, and even maybe a brief abstract. I'd like to keep track of these. I noticed at the Geothermal Rising conference in Reno earlier this year, last month, I believe, there were a lot of talks on Forge that was just coming from the community. And so I had to do quite a bit of work to make sure I could see them all, at least get to most of them, which I did, but there were some I had to miss because of conflict. So the more in advance we know about these things, the better. And I will gladly advertise them to the community as part of this meeting as we go forward. So, and the last thing I want to mention is for next month, Nicole Sharma is going to give us a brief talk on some of the DFN and stimulation modeling that they are doing at UT Austin. So that's all I had to say for today. If there's any questions, I could take a few now. Otherwise, we'll turn it over to Alita. And given that, I will stop my share. Silence means you don't want to hear me talk anymore. So I'll turn it over to Alita.
Great. Hi, everyone. Let me just get my screen set up here. All right. Let me know if you can see the presentation.
Put in presentation mode.
Perfect.
There we go. All right.
Great. Thank you.
All right, let me just jump
Alita,
right.
before you
Yep.
begin, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Mm.
Would you prefer to have people ask you questions as you go, or do you want to save it to the end?
I think as we go is great.
Okay, so audience, if you'd like to ask a question as you go, either pop it in the chat and I'll interrupt. I'm going to keep everybody muted just for the sake of keeping the background noise to a minimum. But I'm happy to interrupt, or if you want to either just, I think you could raise your hand in this. I'm not sure if this tool allows you to raise your hand. I believe you can. Yeah, so either raise your hand or pop something in the chat and I will coordinate the questions. So sorry, Lita. And
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, I won't be monitoring the chat. So Rob, yeah, you jump in when people have questions and we'll go from there. Okay.
Perfect.
All right. All right. So I have presented in the past on what we call the reference discrete fracture network model for the site. And so our work coming from Golder has been to describe the Forge reservoir by actually explicitly representing the fractures in the granite and the gneissic bedrock that we have. So what you're seeing in this picture is we're representing fractures, in this case is planar hexagons. Given that these are sort of igneous metamorphic bodies, we feel like probably the best representation for these fractures is somewhat circular, not sort of a traditional rectangular shape. So you're seeing a bunch of fractures, different sizes. We've talked about how we've parameterized these fractures in the past. But now that we have this microseismic data from the stimulation, we would like to go from what we've had is a more stochastic representation of these fractures, meaning that we know a lot about these fractures from where they intersect the wellbore, from their traces in the nearby mineral mountains. So we know something about the geometry and intensity of these fractures, but we don't really know too much about their specific fractures away from the wellbore. So we've got this new data set, and we would like to refine what we know about the fractures in the system using that data. And we found these DFN models are useful for modeling work if we want to be predicting initial pressure responses to pumping, or do long-term modeling of pressure and temperature responses to production. So it's valuable to have sort of our best guess, our best representation of what these natural fractures and now new stimulated fractures are in the system. So the interpreted microseismic data is now available on the GDR. The earthquake catalogs are provided by our Forge partners, GeoEnergy Suisse, and there's the submission here. What I'm showing here is just one of the files. They've presented one file for each of the 3 stages. So you're seeing just the header for the stage 1, and you can see we're getting information on location. And the location is with respect to a local reference frame, where they're saying the origin is ground level at well 16A 32, and then providing true vertical depth beneath the origin. And so X and Y are with respect to that the well 16A location at the surface, and then we have depth. And then we have properties such as the moment magnitude, peak ground velocity, and other things that we were looking at were they have a quality, which is they say is a dimensionless measure of the event quality, and error. So this is, they're calling the maximum error at the event location that is consistent with the travel time pick. So this available. So let's just mention a little bit about, we have this error term that we're given. We had some predictions about what the error would be on these locations for microseismic events based on the designed location of the geophones in the nearby wells. So The predictions were that the uncertainty would be sort of in the range of 50 to 100 feet for these. I took this figure from the GRC paper from Phil Wanamaker's group, and what you see here is the well location. So 16A, the stimulation happened at the toe of 16A. And then we've got these monitoring wells or the pilot wells, these vertical wells here where there were geophones put in there. There was also surface seismic arrays. So based on the predictions, you have maps here showing the uncertainty that's expected. And their range was in sort of the 50, the sort of pale blue color is sort of 50 feet range. And that's true for most of the region. When they're doing this work, they make a check shot at the injection point. So for each of the stimulation zones, we do have a check shot location. And I just plotted those up here, looking at the well 16A trajectory, and the open hole section here is there in the stimulation zones are sort of the thicker black line here. So stage 1 is here in the open hole section. The predicted error there, well, I don't say predicted, the reported error from the catalog was about 150 feet. I'd say, just looking at the location, looking top down on the left and then a side view on the right, looks like it's, to my eye, it looks like it's probably closer than that. Stage 2, the reported error was in the 50-foot range. And stage 3, the reported error was in the 5-foot range. So you can see sort of how those are appearing. So the modeling team took these catalogs, and the first step was to load it into our existing Leapfrog model. So we needed to translate those local coordinates back into the global coordinates of the model. And this was done by Hari Nupani at Idaho National Labs and shared with the team. So our first sort of look at these microseismic locations with respect to well 16A, which is the blue trajectory here with the intervals in white. And then for reference, a proposed 16B trajectory, another well 100 meters up from 16A is put here for reference, just so you could see some scale and where that microseismic cloud might be intersecting for that location. The points are scaled by the moment magnitude, so you see some larger circles. There's probably some perspective on this as well, though, so you have to be a little careful looking at the sizes because nearer points will be a little bigger than farther points too. But this is just sort of an initial look at the microseismic cloud.
Alita, if I can interrupt there for 1 second while you're transitioning,
Yeah.
Just a quick note to everyone. So the seismic team, was, as Lita said, led by Geoenergy Swiss. When they processed this information, they picked the largest events that were essentially the easier ones to analyze. I was told last week in our team meeting, that they are still going back through. I'm not sure who all is involved, but they're going back through and doing further processing on the catalog, and they're starting to pull out smaller events near essentially the open hole toe and some other areas. So there will be more data coming. I don't know the schedule, but we should get it. The catalog should be augmented at some point in the future.
That'd be great. Yeah, I'd love to see a little bit more what's happening near that first simulation. Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna just walk you through what we did with this initial data. So the idea is, can we fit some planar features through this microseismic cloud of points, in that we are expecting there to be some significant natural fractures or new induced fractures in the system. And we're hoping that the microseismic locations will be pointing those out. So let's, this exercise is to see what would we predict based on that microseismic cloud for the location and size and orientation of actual fractures in the system. So what we did is, you know, we're loading these points and we're visualizing the points for each stage, and also coloring them by the time evolution, so we can see the earlier, the points that are triggering earlier in the sequence versus later. And then we rotate these points in our modeling tool. I was using the Fracman software for this. So it's very much a manual process of rotating these points in 3D, and then turning the perspective off. So we're just looking at a orthogonal projection of these points with whichever view we're looking at. And we're looking for points that sort of line up. You know, we're looking for these linear projections that might indicate points falling on a plane. Sort of if you imagine looking at a plane on its side, if there are a bunch of points on that plane and you rotate it so you're looking edge on, you might see a concentration of points all lining up along a plane. So that's what we're doing. So it's very much a manual process. And then the step 2, manually fit a plane of groups of points that might fall on the plane. Once we sort of identified like, oh, these might be lining things up, the task was to actually just create a plane that sort of matched that just roughly in the modeling tool, put that next to the points, and grab the points near that plane. So say I want to, you know, grab the points within 50 feet of that plane, grab those points, take them, and then do a more algorithmic fit to those points. So using those points, then actually fit a plane to those points, and then create the final found fracture based on the best fit for location, orientation. So all I can say is this is a somewhat tedious process, a little manual, and you know, as I say, there's not one perfect answer for this workflow. Using that methodology, we found 4 planes in stage 1, 5 planes in stage 2, and 2 planes in stage 3. So there were 11 fitted planes from that process. Once we found those, we did adjust the size of them to try to provide for some more connection, because we know we do want a sort of a connected network at the end of the process. So in some cases, we extended the size. So we added 2 planes to connect some features in stage 1. We added 1 plane for stage 2 and 1 plane for connecting stage 2 to the actual injection zone. So we added 4 more, let's see. Yeah, we added 4 more features. And then once we had those 15 fractures, so that's going to be the big answer here. Is like we have a new sort of fitted DFN of just these local fractures. We have 15 fractures that we would like to do more modeling on. And then we just take a look at those, again, sort of visualizing them with looking at the magnitude to certainly make sure we're capturing the most significant events. So yeah, go ahead.
While you're transitioning, I'm going to do a transit or a question to you. The question was, why is the range of error different at different stages?
Yeah, good question. So we had a bunch of failures in the earlier for the geophones at the deeper depths due to temperature in the earlier stages. So let me go, I don't know. And so the plan was to have all these geophones here. And I don't know, Rob, if you want to jump in here.
I can.
It's not,
so yeah, we didn't get into too much detail. It's been pretty well discussed in the full team meeting, but essentially we had some limitations, some equipment problems with the downhole seismic multi-level sensors and some other things, largely due to heat limitations or some cabling issues. I just would say that, so we had better resolution, better spatial coverage as we went further in time. it was hats off to the seismic team in the field. I know they got very little sleep for the entire time the simulation was going because they were actually on the fly trying to fix these things and move them to different levels. So essentially, as we went further in time, stage 1 had the least amount of control via downhole sensors, stage 3 having the best.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question, Hongyu.
Okay.
Thanks.
So I just wanted to show, the first step in this process was just to clean up the data so it would be easier to work with. And I think, Rob, if we are going to throw this out to the community, I think we can make sort of this cleaned up data set available. People are welcome to do their own cleaning too. But what we've done with it is move the coordinates to that global coordinate frame, removed sort of white space in the data set, and then calculated the elapsed time in seconds to allow for easier visualization of earlier events versus later events.
Okay.
And removed the check shots from the microseismic data that we're using to sort of identify planar features. So.
Yeah, I think we'll do a separate GDR upload of these data that you're going to present. But while I interrupted, Colin, I'll let you ask your question.
Yeah, quick question. You used the term check shot several times. A check shot is normally like a VSP. Are you referring here to perforation shots?
Yes.
They weren't perforations, but they were a charge done inside the casing to help just to test the system.
So it was a perforating gun, or?
I'm not sure it was what I believe it was, but I'm not sure exactly what tool it was used to actually set off that shot or that check. But it was a downhole in 16A itself.
Yeah, it's a bit confusing because normally the term check shot refers to VSPs. So, okay.
I apologize. That's not my area of expertise, and I probably am using the incorrect word there.
No, I'm guessing Kevin England, who's on the call from the team, could probably answer that question better. So go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Hey, Colin. Yeah, so the check shot in the open hole was actually a 2-foot perforating gun, and the check shot for the second and third stages was the actual 20-foot perforating guns used to perforate those stages in the casing.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Sorry for interrupting you, Alita. You're good.
That's fine.
Keep raising your hand, everyone. I'll move the questions along at opportune times.
All right. I'm just going to walk you through some of the point clouds and the fitting. What I report here, so for stage 1, we had 210 microseismic points in our catalog. And so the mean error on that as reported there was about 140 feet. So for each stage, I would plot up the population of points with respect to time, just to see if there were obvious patterns that if I should be isolating certain point sets ahead of time before trying to do the fitting. In general, I didn't, but it was interesting just to see the timing on these shots. And I then did plot them up, usually showing the time progression. And so the darker colors, the blue here is the earlier times, going to the red is the later times. So I'm going to show you sort of a series. It's hard to do this without actually, rotating point clouds in 3D. So I'm just going to show you some still shots, but you might get a sense for the process. So this is stage 1 data. So this is just looking from the south, sort of this initial view of the locations. And then, so I'm switching to a log time scale, tended to be a little more interesting for some of the views I was looking at. And so in this case, it's still the same with the blue and the green colors are the earlier ones, yellow to orange to red are the later times. So, this first one is a top view of the cloud. Nothing's really jumping out there as far as linear features. Looking from the south, my eye was picking up some interesting trends there. And then looking from the east, you can see some clumping, some groups of features, but my eye wasn't picking up much in terms of linear features. And as I was trying to fit planes, sometimes it was helpful to refer back to the original DFN, where we had identified particular fracture sets based on their orientation. So we are certainly expecting to see fractures in these 4 main orientations, where we have sort of this south striking, moderately dipping west set here. We might have, you know, I was looking for an east striking, steeply dipping south set here. We had a south-southwest striking vertical set, and also this north striking, steeply dipping east set here. So as I was sort of manually fitting planes, I had samples of these orientations available, so I could have them sort of readily there as sort of a teaser to encourage me to find them. So I didn't rely on that, but I found it was a little helpful to have those in mind as to what might be present in this rock. So continuing sort of looking at these point clouds, looking along the lateral. So I sort of aimed my view just looking from the end of the well, looking back through the well. And, you know, I did some experimentation with only selecting earlier times versus later times and looking at smaller groups of sets too. So, and here, as I say, so here's sort of some sample planes of these are orientations that we might be expecting to find in the reservoir. So as I was sort of looking for features, I'm seeing, oh, just something lining up with that orientation. And here I was plotting the error of those points, and the scale bar on these error goes from 5 feet to 550 feet about in those. And what did I want to say about this pictures? Nothing new there. Okay. All right. So, you know, once my eye sort of saw, okay, I want to grab these points. I just manually created a fracture there, and then pulled the points closest to it, did the fitting, and then recreated the fracture with the best fit of the algorithm there. So it sort of had a little Python script just to find the midpoint and the orientation of the best fit plane through those points, and a radius starting there too. Okay. So there's also that stage 1 are these these 4 fractures. This first one I found, I used 149 of the points to fit a feature through there. The second one, I only used 16, but I really did see, you know, my eye was begging me to fit this feature here. 3, only 7 points here. I didn't feel too strongly about this set, but I do want to fit 1 or more planes to this set of points down here, so the DFN does reach into this area. And then for this 4th one, this one in this orientation, there were 24 points. Stage 2, we had a lot more points, 947 in the catalog. The mean error was only 41 feet in these, removing just one that had a like, I think for some, maybe they couldn't calculate error. I removed them if they had an error of like 100,000. So I think there was one case that had an odd error on this one. So removing that point, the mean error was only 40 feet on this stage 2. Same thing, I look at the time progression. We had this 1 point over here that was sort of beforehand, and then big set here, some following here. So for stage 2, we're seeing sort of this early clump here of points, and then this later one moving upward, another big set, not really seeing linear features so much, but there's 2 distinct sets there. And then with time, we're reaching up vertically and reaching these other areas up here. So again, just sort of rotating top view, looking from the south, looking from the east, and looking along the direction of the lateral. And the first one I wanted to fit that first clump of data. So I've colored the points in purple, the ones that I pulled out and said, I'm going to fit a plane through those points. And that's shown here, the first one. Second one, I pulled out these points, and that's sort of second clump. Third one, I pulled out these sets of features here. For this fourth one, I wanted to get some of the features, some of the points further away. So I pulled out these points. And then the fifth one I picked was selecting these points here. So for stage 2, I had these points, and what you're seeing now with the size is showing the moment magnitudes on them, showing that certainly the largest events were down here, and these top ones were certainly not as large. And just for reference, I'm showing the stage 1 picked features here over as well. All right, and then stage 3, there were, again, a lot more points here, over 1,400 points, and the mean error was actually a little higher than in stage 2, which surprised me. I had to remove 4 points from that set, but just looking at the mean error in the recorded catalog, it was 56 feet. So same thing here, looking at the events over time and then visualizing them in space. Stage 3. So here the top view was actually very suggestive of some linear features. Whereas looking from the south, not so much. Looking from the east, not so much. Actually look from this, yeah. And then looking along the direction of the lateral, you can just see, just from the time progression, these points sort of spreading out over time in a somewhat uniform way. So I fit 2 planes to that data set, and really it's that top-down view. Certainly you could fit more smaller features to this one, but 2 large features fit most of the data points to my eye, and there is some benefit to having fewer features for modeling purposes. So I erred on the side of choosing fewer features as opposed to more. They're shown here. And just top-down view, you see this one very large feature, and this one lines up. This is probably an induced hydraulic fracture. It lines up very well with the direction of maximum horizontal stress. And then this vertical feature here is striking to the north. Just putting it all together. These are the 11 found planes. So this is looking from the south side view, and then a top-down view. And you can see there's a very different characteristics between zones 1 and 2, where we're getting mostly these south dipping features, sort of inclined, versus stage 3, where we have these 2 really vertical features. And then just to make the DFN connected, I added a few more planes. So I wanted to, for stage 1, I wanted to connect this one in this lower area. So I added 1 more south dipping. This is kind of an odd view, but this actually is another south dipping feature. And then a conjugate sort of pair to that over here to connect those 2. And then I added this, this pretty much vertical east striking feature, which is an orientation we expect from the FMI logs that we have in the wells here, but we didn't see it in the microseismic cloud, but I added one just to connect these features, and also added this hydraulic fracture from stage 2 to connect the stage 2 features. And stage 1 features and stage 2 features are connecting in this. All right, so so what we're working with now are these 15 features. We're also combining that with some of the stochastic features that we had been using for modeling purposes further away from the well, but near the well, the large features that we are including in our modeling are these 15 fractures. And we're using a modeling region of 600 meters square. And then the question in my mind was, well, of these found features, I know we were a bit biased in looking for features that lined up with the 4 sets we had found before, but how did it compare in the end? So we have here an upper hemisphere stereo net where the sort of expected mean poles of fracture sets are shown in these X's here. So we were expecting maybe to see features here, the sort of vertical features here, steeply dipping here, moderately dipping here, and then inclined south dipping features here. So these X's. And what I'm plotting then are the actual found features so for blue is for stage 1. So we had those south dipping inclined features plus one of those east dipping, a little bit more steep features there. For stage 2 in green, more of those really, I think I was saying south dipping. Those are, so really the west dipping, east south, north south trending, west dipping. Sorry.
So Alina,
Green here.
Came in.
Yeah.
Is it a good time? So Peter Meyer asked if you're also utilizing data from the Schlumberger 3D far field sonic logs.
Yeah, so I don't have a slide to show that here. I did look at that, and the information from there extends to a distance of about 30 to 50 feet from the well borehole. So we do have indications of features there. They weren't lining up particularly well with the microseismic cloud, and I think it's worth spending a little more time with that. And my sense was with that 3D, the far field sonic data, is I felt pretty confident that there were features, like they were able to identify features there, but there was some noted bias in the orientations of those features that was a little hard to explain. So I had less confidence in the orientations of those points. But we were looking at that, and it wasn't, they weren't lining up particularly well with the seismic cloud, is what I can say. But I think it is worth showing that in a presentation. I think that would be an worthwhile endeavor. And for, let's see, stage 3 was in purple. We had those 2 vertical features here. And this one's lining up perfectly well with the expected hydraulic fractures. That's this sort of black diamond here is what we would expect from our stress field. So it lines up really well with that. And then we had just that one north-south vertical feature here that the strike is kind of what we'd expect from these west dipping ones, but it's steeper than we were expecting. So a little bit harder to explain that one. All right, so I walked you through what we did. That was sort of our best cut at trying to use this microseismic data to edit the reference DFN. But yeah, we kind of want to throw it out to the community and get some feedback here at this talk and get some other ideas about how we should use that seismic data to inform the DFN that we're using for our modeling. So here's the reference on the GDR of the raw data. Well, it's not the raw data. This is very much the located data coming from a GeoEnergy Swiss. And we'll put the acknowledgements there, and yeah, more questions and discussion.
Thanks, Alita. As Alita said, this is definitely, there's the art and the science of doing these. It is definitely a non-unique solution. So some questions coming in. Actually, Mark McClure, go ahead. You can just take a come on audio.
Thanks. Hey, Leda. So the first two stages, I think they were having trouble with the microseismic array. There's, more location uncertainty than in the third stage. That's my understanding. You know more about it than me. So I guess, to what extent is there a risk that we're just seeing noise and we're just fitting planes to noise? And maybe a follow-up question is how can these DFNs be validated? In other words, is there any data that we'll ever collect that will ever prove or disprove that they're right?
So I'll let Lita answer the first part of that, but I'll come in on the second part, Mark.
Okay.
I guess the first part is, so actually the error, I was surprised the error reported for stage 2 wasn't that, it was actually better than for stage 3, which surprised me because I'd been hearing that, given the arrays that the locations were probably worse for stage 2 than stage 3, but that was not what was reported in the catalog. So I would like maybe a little more information about that as well. And I guess I'm looking, we have this data. There are points that seem to line up with expected orientations from the FMI log data we have. It's as I say, I don't think, the planes that I found are unique, but I was seeing planar features, and certainly, the one you would expect for stage 3, this sort of feature here is what you would predict from just the stress field. And yet this feature here is as prominent.
Yeah.
So in my mind, yes, there's uncertainty in the data, but to me, it was somewhat compelling that it was highlighting some features here. I don't know what to say about that. It's like, well, if this, why are we collecting this data if we can't go here? Like,
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm just thinking of kind of like the experience of the shale industry, whereas 2002 they're doing microseismic. People were drawing a lot of lines in microseismic, and they developed a conceptual model. And then 2022, we have a lot of data where we've cored through wells and we've run image logs after we drilled through the fractures, and we're running fiber to see strain fields, and we're seeing a bunch of planar parallel features. So the conceptual model that was developed in shale 20 years ago has been largely disproven by firmer data. So I mean, to me, we just have to kind of ask, what can we really get from microseismic? Maybe we can get a sense of the region's size and shape, but it may be perilous to try to infer kind of fine scale features from microseismic. I don't know. That's at least that's what I think happened in shale.
yeah, and so would you expect shale to be the same as granite in that respect?
I don't know. So I'm not sure. I don't have a strong opinion about this. I just see uncertainty is all.
So if you allow me, Lolita and Mark.
Go ahead.
Granted, there definitely is uncertainty here, and I don't think we're purporting to say this is the solution. It is one potential solution out of many. All may end up being wrong. We don't know, but we're starting from somewhere. So this was, and our work here is to, again, as our role as the Forge team is to make a start, take a stab, and then we're inviting the community to come through and also do similar analyses of any kind of either ocular or some kind of parameterized or even a code-based solution to try to come up with some fits to these. And I'd like to actually come through and compare them all together at some point. Now, as far as adding some control to these, this is the important part, Mark, and it's something that we're working on really closely to try in coordination with some of the the solicitation one awardees, as well as the Forge team between the well team and the reservoir sustainability team, is developing methodologies and things when we're testing and we're drilling and testing 16B. So as you know, there are plans to core through as much as possible of the toe of 16B to actually look for, to see if we can detect some of the tracers and other things that were put in when these stimulations were done. So we are doing that. I would say, I think, an honest viewpoint is, our coring results have been mixed, just based on the difficulty between the depth, the temperature, and the rock type. But we're also looking at ways to do early reservoir testing between A and B once that happens, where this is still in planning phase. I'm not committing to anything here, but using some of our DTS or DAS fibers in the open holes or inside the holes themselves. And when we do some of these flow tests between the two wells to look for areas where we see flow entering or exiting the respective well, which should hopefully give us a lot of insight onto this actual fracturing process. That, I think, will be really illustrative of this. There will be some limitations, I believe, in whether we could just do a flow test in the open hole toe, or we have to test all three zones that are there now together. That's some things we're still working through, but I think the intent, and we're making some good headway on this, is to do some rigorous testing to see exactly how the system is plumbed when we start doing some longer term flow tests.
Yeah,
And Mark, just one more thing. Look, I cannot explain zone 1 stimulation with a simple hydraulic fracture. So yeah, we're getting all this activity way over here. Yeah, there's definitely more that's going on than a simple hydraulic fracture.
Good. I'm gonna move on if we're okay.
Yep, thanks, guys.
Kayla Kroll, I believe you had a question. I'll just let you ask it. Kayla.
I don't think it's Kayla, I think it's me, but we all use Kayla's link, so we are all.
I see the thing, it has to do with GDR and the DFN.
It's Matteo Cosini, by the way, also from Lawrence Illumination Lab. Yeah, I was wondering if the DFN you created could be made available, and if yes, in what format. It'd be nice to try to run some for mechanics simulations on this.
So are you talking about the one we just showed right now? I see it, Colin. The one we have right now, or in the history for the reference DFN? Because all of this is already on GDR. I think Alita's interpretations are not. These most recent ones, these 15 fractures. But the reference DFN is available on the GDR in multiple formats. I'll let Lita elaborate on what those formats are.
Yeah, no, I imagine there's going to be a lot of interest. I think people would like this new one. And I don't know. I know this will get to the GDR. I don't know about the timing. If we want to, yeah, I guess I want to throw this back to Rob. Like, we're going to be starting to do some simulation work, some modeling work using these fractures. When do we share that with the greater community?
I'm happy to put it up there now, just with the caveat that, this is an interpretation that could be one of many.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
we are starting with something. And as if we get better, more refined interpretations, or we get more data to help inform it, then we will pivot as appropriate. Colin.
Yeah. And let me just say, and then the formats that we're providing these, so one is just sort of a CSV file of, fracture centers, radius, and orientation. And then other formats we can actually provide sort of surface format, surface file formats, or sort of the Fracman native fab file format. So there's a variety of formats we can provide these in, or even an Exodus mesh as well. So.
Okay.
Colin.
Sounds great.
Okay, Colin says here. So I have a comment on the previous question, and then I have a question to the speaker. So the comment to the previous questioner was, I think it may be misleading to try and seek an analogy between shales and granite. Shales are extremely anisotropic, And, you know, if we're to believe the DFN that was shown right at the beginning of this talk, this granite is much more fractured than a normal unconventional shale. So I'd issue a note of caution to assume the granite behaves like an unconventional shale.
Well, to clarify, that's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is analogously, people were really overconfident in microseismic interpretations in shale, and subsequent data collection showed that people were overconfident. It's a more comment on human nature, perhaps, than granite versus shale.
Sure, but for the reasons I gave, a shale is not like a granite. So my question to the speaker really is about the length scale of the fractures. So when we imagine a hydraulic fracture propagating through, you know, you showed the DFN with numerous fractures, okay?
Mhm.
Now, those pre-existing fractures, presumably their orientations are given by paleostresses. But you were seeking you know, you implied that you were looking for a correlation between the orientation of the hydraulic fractures and the natural fractures. But the natural fractures, their orientations, I assume, will be determined by paleostresses. Whereas if, you know, if the, and this is why I ask about length scale, if the fractures are small compared to the ultimate hydraulic fracture, then I imagine that a hydraulic fracture propagating through this sea of smaller natural fractures will seek out some kind of tortuous path
Mhm.
that is determined by the present day stresses. And so I don't think there's necessarily a correlation between the paleo stresses and the present day stresses. In other words, a correlation between the natural fractures and the hydraulic fracture. As I say, it would, you know, if the natural fractures are small compared to the hydraulic fracture, then it would seek out a path determined by the present day stresses. So I wondered if you had some thoughts on that and whether you believe the paleo stresses are aligned in some way with the present day stresses.
So I agree with you completely that the paleo stresses are a bit different. I think in it doesn't look like there are some similarities into the probable stress orientations in the past when those initial natural fractures were forming versus today. It's not hugely different. It's not hugely different. But yeah, there is that difference. And I think what we see as far as comparing the natural fractures versus the current stress model is there is some correlation, even so today, as far as which ones seem to be more open than closed, say. The ones that are more open do seem to be the ones that are experiencing more shear stress today. That's not to say then there's some more ones that aren't as open with smaller apertures that aren't well aligned. That being said, it was something we were looking for. So we had the 4 sets that we sort of considered more the pre-existing natural fractures. And in addition to that, we were looking for this new orientation based on the current stress model. So we were looking for really 5. I was looking for 5 different orientations, sort of the 4 existing ones plus this new one. And the fluids that were used during the stimulations were different. It was more, I believe the slick water was for the first 2 zones, where a high viscosity fluid for this 3rd stage. And we did see a very different response, I believe, as a result. Now, the size of the fractures, I don't actually believe we have such large single fractures forming. What I believe is happening is we're getting a bunch of sort of parallel features that are lining up. As you say, they're connecting to some of the existing ones, but then sort of connecting in the stress field. But for modeling purposes, it's if we can reduce a whole connected set of natural ones to a single feature, it's a lot more useful for our modeling purposes. But you know, I'm seeing, you know, this actually looks to me like a bunch of maybe these more north-south features lining up, you know, along this orientation too. So as I say, there's many ways to do that. So I think these large features that I'm putting in here are really simplifications of a more complicated, more tortuous pathway that's generally aligning with these larger features that I'm identifying.
Also, was it stated that you were going to put your edited data set in the repository? When will that be available? I'd quite like to look at it.
I'm fine putting it up as soon as possible. We've released it to our internal modeling team, so the files are all sort of available, but we haven't released it to the GDR yet. But I guess, you know, I guess some sense is we were waiting for this forum to get some feedback, whether people had enough confidence in this work that they wanted to play with what we had, or if we wanted to get some more different interpretations first and then release it all as a set of here's 5 possibilities, right?
I wasn't interested in the interpretation.
Oh, the fractions, just
I was
the cleaned up
interested
data.
in your edited data, you know, where you put it in global coordinates, etc.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think we could release that this week, just so everyone has the exact. I mean, we could go back to the submission that Alita already highlighted earlier that has the full data set. But since we've done some cleaning of it and modifying it of ourselves, I think we'll re-release that. It will add it to that submission. I'll talk to our data manager. So Alita, talk to Greg Nash about that and see if we could put it into that pre-existing GDR submissions, just add a supplement to it. I'm going to pivot here to Mukul Sharma. Go ahead and ask your question, Mukul.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, a very nice talk, Alita. So that was enjoyed it. I was just wondering, is there a way to tell among these planes that you've identified from the microseismic, which one of these might be hydraulically induced versus shear slip events that would be perhaps natural fractures, and what kind of connectivity you would have? The scale of these fractures and these planes that you've drawn, as you explained, might be suggesting that this is a whole collection of maybe natural fractures that have been reactivated, or maybe a hydraulic fracture that's propagating. Is there a plan to, are you modeling the propagation of the fracture, or is it just a matter of interpreting this data and then figuring out some of them might be hydraulic and some of them might be natural? Could you explain that a little bit?
I think I can help here, Alita. So what we're doing with Mukul right now actually is we essentially I'm air quoting we because Alita did it, but she took these interpretations, and we also then essentially added them into our reference DFN that we've used previously for the pre-stimulation modeling. So we built some of these features into that DFN, and now the Itasca team actually is going through and redoing the stimulation models to see if we can get a better match to the pressure and the microseismic events. We were really happy with the results we got from our pre-test or pre-stimulation models. I think we covered such a wide range of uncertainty and different scenarios between mechanical properties, boundary conditions, regional stresses, and the like, and fluid properties, that we actually described all of these stimulation events really well. But the rub in that was, in some cases, one parameterization modeled one stimulation stage the best, where a different set of either physical or fluid properties matched another. So we're going to try to go through and redo some of that work to get a better fit, or hopefully see what we can learn. You know, if we can have a consistent set of parameterization across the entire domain and still get the same goodness of fit, or at least confidence in our predictions. A little bit further, go ahead. You have a follow up?
Well, I was just going to ask, so are you propagating the hydraulic fracture and looking at the interaction with the natural fracture, the DFN? Is that what is being done, or?
Yes, that is. That's what we did essentially in the pre-test modeling, and we're actually redoing it now. We're just augmenting the DFN with some of these other features in there to see that it would come somewhat similar.
So then you can tell where the hydraulic fracture is and where the natural fractures are from the modeling side.
Correct.
Okay.
I will just say that there were only 2 hydraulic fractures in my model, and that's just identified by orientation.
Mhm.
So this big one here, that's lines up perfectly with the stress field, and that's what you would expect from a hydraulic fracture. I
Mhm.
also added a small hydraulic fracture to connect the zone 2 features. So there were only 2 hydraulic fractures in this particular DFN, and the others were shear stimulation, probably because these orientations would be expected to slip pretty early on, given the stress field. So
All right, thank you.
Okay, we could stay on as long, I know, I'm not sure we were scheduled for an hour or longer. We'll stay on as long as the questions keep coming, because that's the purpose of these meetings. Leopoldo, you had a question? I'll let you ask it. Okay, he's gone silent, so I'll ask it. Is there a possibility that some of the fractures are not following dry MS event other than a wet MS event? I'm not sure how to answer that, but Alita, I don't know if you have a comment. If you're still on, Leopoldo, you can actually come and clarify and ask it yourself. Having no response, I'm going to move on, unless you had some kind of a comment, but if the person here is the answer, we can just move on.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's water in these in these features, and so I guess I don't know necessarily what a dry versus a wet event is. So
What
I
do you
don't
mean
want
is-
to delve into that.
I mean, I can explain what that means. A dry event means like in the stress shadow around the fracture. So if a fluid's going into one fracture, but it creates a stress shadow around it, then you could create microseismicity purely from the stress shadow. And that would be a quote dry event, even though you're correct, it's not actually dry, 100%.
Fair enough. Okay. Moving on, next question. Okay, so the person identified as Kayla, who is not Kayla, asked your question, but I will tell you, please register by yourself for this, so you can come in under your own name. If you use someone else's registration, and once you register, the logins are tied to you individually. So come in and register for this series under your own email address. The person identifying as Kayla Kroll today. But you can go and ask your question.
Hey, Rob, it is actually Kayla this time.
Oh.
Give me just 1 second, though.
Okay, sorry.
And then I have a question. Is Kayla twin number 2?
Yeah, so the first question is when you include the new fracture set that you guys, the inferred fractures from seismicity in your DFN and then run your forward simulations, do you see any like significant changes that you can identify as being related to that fracture set, or are you getting more or less similar results?
I'll be able to answer that, or we'll be able to answer that in a month or two. Those things are actually solving, they're doing an explicit thing and solve the full, it's not, essentially we're not doing a quasi-static approximation for these, so it's solving the full motion equations. It takes a lot of time to run those. So Itasca is working on that right now, but I don't have an answer for you.
All right,
Maybe
thank
next
you.
month. Maybe next month. I think, does that get the end of our questions? We still have some more time here, or we'll understand as long as anyone else is.
Kayla clone number 2 still has one, otherwise known as Luke Fresh.
Oh, all right then, please do.
So when I'm looking at these DFNs, which are awesome, by the way, I think you're doing a really good job with this interpretation. The main thing that pops into my mind is similar to Mark McClure, but at a different angle. In terms of like a common DFN model, I think it's important that we somehow also consider the unknown fracture locations, acknowledging that microseismicity can occur on, or microseismicity is only where things are making noise. It's not necessarily where fluid is flowing. A lesson that I learned back in grad school doing EGS experiments in blocks of rock was that I drilled to try to hit where all the noise was, and I completely missed the fracture. The noise was very, very misleading as to where the actual fluid was going. So I would recommend in some way to try to consider the fractures that could be there that don't show up in this data in our future flow modeling using this kind of thing. Because with this kind of work, there's a danger that we all think the same way and assume the same situation, and all of us are wrong. Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's why I will say, Luke, so this fracture I added is one of those cases where there's no microseismic data to justify it, but we would expect these orientations, and we can go back and check in the stress field, but this probably isn't one that's oriented very well for failing in shear. So this might be just a pre-existing fracture that connects or not. But so we can add those things. But as I say, there's not, other than knowing that these orientations exist and might not have a microseismic signal, we don't know where to put them. But I did feel free to add a few, right? Saying I can't justify this, but I'm going to put this in here anyhow to connect things up. But yeah, before we sort of break too, I really I want to know, is there some appetite in the community for other people in this group to come up with DFN, interpretations from this data?
If you just want to raise your hand or give a thumbs up if you have an interest, that'll work for a poll. But we will post the information. I saw somebody pop. Oh yeah. Okay, we're seeing some of that. So there is interest, and I think there's great interest. I do want to point out that there is artistic license that was taken with this interpretation, simply because it's required at this point. What I am hearing from some of the questions and some of the point of discussion is the need, and I'm going to take this need back to the management team to help justify really detailed flow experiments and detailed monitoring of where fluid enters and exits A and B when we start doing some of these tests. That's really going to be the only way we'll know whether these fractures are real or imagined. I mean, we could do some tracer tests and we'll do some conservative and non-conservative tracers, but it's still only going to be part of the answer. So
yeah, and I think Rob, that was the nature of the question about dry and wet fractures. Was the fluid goes into certain connected fractures, and fluid does not enter disconnected or isolated fractures. And the modeling that we're doing basically identifies three kinds of fractures: isolated ones or dry ones, backbone fractures, which communicate from point A to point B, and then what are called essentially fractures that only connect to one well but not the other. So I think these are called dead end fractures. So backbone, dead end, and isolated. And I think what we care about the most, of course, is the connected fracture network, because that's ultimately what communicates fluid from one side to the other.
agreed.
And establishing the scale of these fractures that are created is absolutely critical in determining whether you have one or the other being more important or less important, isolated versus connected fractures. So I think this map is a great starting point, but I think a lot more needs to be done in trying to understand the connectivity between these fracture networks.
Agreed. And that's a perfect time for another shameless plug. McCool will give us a presentation next month on an update of their DFN and stimulation modeling work. So we're all looking forward to that.
Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Further questions? Eric Sonneth, I'll just ask it.
Hi, yeah, I was just wondering about, we know there's these location uncertainties, which you can never get around, and they're different for each stage. If you were to plot, I don't know how the bars would look, like a typical kind of uncertainty bar, or if it's just that size symbol, what would they look like?
I think that would be useful. I can easily plot that up by plotting the size of the dots by the error reported. So I think that would be one way to show that kind of uncertainty, where sort of instead of plotting these things up where the size is based on the moment magnitude. So maybe the best ones might be the biggest ones. It would be sort of the converse, where the biggest ones are showing the biggest uncertainty. So would be interesting to plot it up that way. I'll do so.
Would be. But once again, Eric, I want to say again that we did take some artistic license. We went through some of these as a team and talked through it a bunch. But we don't want to try to imply that this is what the reality is. This is an interpretation of data that it's an uncertain artistic interpretation of based on uncertain data. So there is a lot here that this will get better, but it is a starting point, and that's kind of the real point we wanted to make from this discussion today. Is we need to start somewhere.
No, I have no problem. I mean, obviously, it's just for everyone else. like if you look at a geochemical plot, you know, if you don't have error, you know, if you know the errors, sometimes it's like, well, how much can you, like maybe stage 2, like you're saying, oh, that data is better. So you'll be able to kind of see, well, where do I have more confidence in my interpretation? Not
True.
that you don't
That's a
know
good
that the
point.
interpretation is still, you know, an interpretation, you know?
That's a really good point, Eric. and Thanks for bringing it up. I think we should do that.
Thanks.
Luke,
Ooh, so then I could plot the inverse of the error, and that would be an easier way to try to fit the more significant points. Good suggestion. Thanks.
Just another comment. You know, to determine microseismic events, you need a velocity field. So how well known is this velocity field? Remember, if this is a fractured medium, then the velocity will change with fracture density. It can also be anisotropic. So what is being assumed about the velocity of the background medium?
so yeah, I think that right now, Colin, is beyond the scope of the modeling team. I'd have to point you, I can take your question if you want to email it to me, and I'll point it to the seismic team to let them address it for you. That's a discussion for a different time, a different group. Luke Fresh, you're asking about data.
Yeah, so something that would be really helpful when sharing the results that you have here is if you could provide like a simple CSV file that would be, you know, row by row, each fracture feature, have maybe a center point location, XYZ, and then an orientation, maybe strike slip for each of the fractures that you've identified in your model. That way we can easily port this into other codes.
Yeah, we have that. So
Okay, thanks.
I'm working to post a link for one of the questions here. We can register for this forum for our person formerly known. There's a registration link. Oh, I think I actually got to the end of the questions. So if there are no further questions, we can adjourn for the day. But once again, we're happy to stay on and go as long as you like. Oh, I just got a message. Actually, I think there's another team that's going to want to support or present similar work next month as well. So I think we'll have presentations from UT Austin as well as OU. So Ahmad, thanks for your volunteering. I like when I get volunteers for these because it saves me from having to voluntold people. So we'll go from there. And if there's no further questions, I think we'll break for the day. I thank everyone for their comments. As always, if you have questions, comments, snide remarks, I'm going to post my email address in here. Please send them to me directly. I mean, our whole goal for this is to make the work better and to work with you. And so I take nothing personally here unless it's a personal attack, but so we're all in this together, and let's just drive the science and drive everything we can. Success with this site relies on everyone. So I thank you all for your attendance and your time. Have a great day, and we'll talk again in the next month. So thank you very much. Bye, everyone.
bye, thanks.
Thanks. Interesting.